You know, when you think of Rome, what comes to mind? For a lot of us, it's the fountains, right? They're just everywhere, these incredible masterpieces of art and water that feel like the very soul of the city. But what if I told you they're more than just beautiful sculptures? What if they're actually broadcasting centuries-old political messages hidden in plain sight? Okay, let's get into it. So we're starting in Piazza Navona, and this is where you'll hear one of the most famous stories of artistic rivalry ever. The legend goes that the great Gian Lorenzo Bernini designed his fountain to basically throw shade at his arch-nemesis Francesco Borromini. You see the statue there? That's the Rio della Plata. And supposedly he's throwing his hand up in terror, convinced that Borromini's church is about to collapse on him. And the Nile god? He's covering his face, so he doesn't even have to look at the thing. It's an amazing story, right? A feud literally carved in stone.
I mean, that's some A-plus art history drama right there.
But there's just one tiny little problem with it. It's not true. Not even a little bit. See, here's the thing. Bernini's fountain was completed in 1651. But the work on Borromini's facade over there, that didn't even start until 1653. The statues just couldn't be reacting to something that, well, that wasn't even there yet.
Okay, so if that whole epic rivalry story is a bust, then what's really going on here? Well, let me tell you, the true story is way more interesting than a simple artistic spat. This is a story about absolute power, papal ambition, and the politics of a war that tore a continent apart. And to get it, you have to understand this one spot has history, like deep history. Way back in 80 AD, this was a massive stadium for athletic games. After Rome fell, it became the city's main market in the 1400s. It was only in the 1600s that it became this grand stage for Baroque power that we see today. The point is, this space has always been at the very heart of Roman life. All right, to really get what's happening with these fountains, you've got to meet the man behind some of the big ones, Pope Urban VIII, from the Borromini family. Now, he wasn't just some art lover, he was a militant pope who ruled during the incredibly bloody 30 Years' War, which was this huge, devastating conflict between Catholic and Protestant powers, fighting for the soul of Europe. And you don't have to take my word for it. Just listen to the man himself. He once told an ambassador, "Our nature is to carry matters out with ardor and vehemence." This guy rearmed the Papal States, he expanded his territory, he saw himself as a warrior pope, and his art? That was just another weapon in his arsenal. Okay, so let's look at our first clue. This is Bernini's Triton Fountain, which Pope Urban commissioned in 1642. It sits in the piazza that's literally named after his family, the Barberini. On the surface, it looks pretty straightforward. Now, the public story, the one everyone knew, was that it was a nod to Urban being a poet. Triton was a symbol of gaining immortality through literature. Nice, right? Respectable. But there's a hidden meaning. In Ovid's Metamorphoses, Triton blows his conch shell to signal that the world-destroying flood is over. For Urban, that flood was the 30 Years' War, and the cause was Protestant heresy. So this fountain was actually a proclamation. Triton's horn was announcing the coming Catholic victory that would, in his eyes, wash away Protestantism for good. So, after Urban VIII, a new pope comes to town, Innocent X, from the Pamphili family. And he had his own grand ambitions, all focused right back on Piazza Navona. He was determined to one-up the Barberini family and turn this entire square into a massive monument to his own family's power. He basically turned this public space into what one historian called the Pamphili's backyard. He expanded their family palace to take over one whole side of the square and commissioned a new family church right next to it. He had the stage. Now all he needed was a showstopper for the middle. And this is where we get back to our famous rivals, Bernini and Borromini. See, their real rivalry wasn't about making faces at each other's buildings. No. It was a high-stakes professional battle. The new pope, Innocent, hated the old pope Urban, and that meant he also hated Urban's favorite artist, Bernini. Borromini was in, Bernini was out. But somehow, Bernini snuck a model of his fountain design in front of the Pope, who was so blown away he had no choice but to give the commission to the guy he couldn't stand. The prize was the single most important artistic project in all of Rome. Because the Fountain of the Four Rivers wasn't just some pretty sculpture. Oh no, it was a massive in-your-face declaration of global power. It was a statement that every corner of the known world fell under the authority of the Catholic Church, and specifically under Pope Innocent X. So, let's break this thing down. First up, the Nile, representing Africa. Remember the myth about him not wanting to look at the church? Well, the real reason is so much cooler. His head is covered because, at the time, the source of the Nile was one of the world's great geographical mysteries. No European knew where it began. It's a symbol of the unknown.
Next, we've got the Danube for Europe, and here the politics get really explicit. After the 30 Years' War, the peace treaty said that a bunch of Protestant lands along the Danube had to go back to being Catholic. And what does Bernini do? He has the Danube god literally reaching up and touching the papal coat of arms. It's a clear symbol of those territories coming back under the Pope's authority.
Moving over to Asia, here's the Ganges. He's holding a long oar, symbolizing the huge navigable rivers of the continent. And why did that matter? Because those rivers were the highways for European trade. And even more important for the papacy, for Catholic missionaries spreading the faith deep into the East.
And finally, the Rio de la Plata, representing the Americas. It's not exactly subtle, this one. He's sitting on a pile of coins representing the incredible wealth pouring out of the New World, wealth that was funding the church and all of its ambitions right here in Rome.
So let's step back and look at the whole picture here. You have the 4 major continents all bowing down below this ancient Egyptian obelisk, a symbol of pagan power that's been conquered and now has a cross on top. And what's at the very, very peak? A dove with an olive branch. Now that's not just a symbol of peace or the Holy Spirit, that is the personal emblem of the Pamphili family. The message couldn't be clearer. World peace is Pamphili peace.
And you know, this wasn't just a one-time thing. This idea of using art as propaganda was what Baroque Rome was all about. The entire city was a political theater. Take a look at another Bernini fountain for Pope Urban VIII, the Barcaccia at the bottom of the Spanish Steps. It's a sinking boat. Why a sinking boat? Well, that piazza was stuck right between the rival embassies of France and Spain. The fountain was meant to show the church, the ship of the church, as the stable force calmly navigating the waters between these two bickering Catholic powers. Just as Urban himself wrote, his war machine shoots forth not flames, but waters sweet that quench the fires of war.
What this all boils down to is pretty simple, really. When you walked through 17th century Rome, you were walking through a masterclass in political messaging. These incredible fountains weren't just there to provide drinking water, they were there to broadcast power, reach, and the very specific agendas of the popes who paid for them.
And that kind of leaves us with one last question, doesn't it? Art and architecture are never really neutral. They're always telling a story. So the next time you walk past a monument or a statue in your own town, maybe stop for a second and ask yourself, what story is this really trying to tell me? And maybe more importantly, whose story is it?